Welcome back. I've had a few requests for a closer look, a walkthrough of Morning Vicar. So here we go. The Cornish Shrimper was designed by Roger Dongray in 1979, and since then well over 1,000 have been built. Morning Vicar was commissioned on the 22nd of June 1988, and she's a classic Mark I shrimper. Length with the bowsprit is 6.82 metres, which is a touch over 22 feet, with a beam of 2.18 metres and a draft of 1.22 metres with the centreboard down. With the centreboard up, she floats in about 18 inches. Starting at the bow, we have a nice strong oak bowsprit. This originally would have been a Sitka spruce one, but if you've been paying attention, on previous videos I've explained about the replacement. It's seated in a socket at the front end of the Samson post. It passes through a galvanised stem fitting, which also includes an anchor roller. At the end of the bowsprit, the forestay is attached, which now goes right to the top of the mast. This is to give some separation between the forestay and the roller reefing, which is attached just inside it, and this helps to prevent accidental fouling of the forestay when you fill the jib. The jib is on a furling spar with a continuous control line fed back to the cockpit. This, I believe, is an upgrade from the original equipment Shrimper furling jib, and I think works really well. The bow has this recessed anchor well. The anchor, chain and rode is stored in this mesh bag secured underneath the bowsprit. This is actually a relatively safe place to work when you need to. You can sit in front of the mast on top of the cabin roof with your feet in the anchor well and sort out the anchor and any lines you need to. There are two port lights opening from the cabin into the anchor well, and I have a vent in the deck between the mast and Samson post. The mast is held in a galvanised steel tabernacle, which makes raising and lowering really quite straightforward, with single shrouds each side, slightly aft 2 chain plates. The front of the mast now has 2 cleats. They are offset so that they can both be used effectively. The lower cleat takes the main jib halyard. It has a 2-to-1 at the top of the mast and a loop in the halyard near the bottom, which gives me plenty of purchase to get the right tension for the jib. This used to be fed back to the cockpit, but I've terminated it at the mast as I never need to adjust it. The second cleat is for another halyard. Its main function at the moment is to hoist a zipped sail cover for the furling jib, but it can be used for all manner of other things. Walking back on the deck, on the port side you can see the continuous control line from the furling jib through fairlead to a couple of cleats in the cockpit. On the starboard side, the peak and throat halyards for the main go down to blocks on the deck and then aft to 2 clutches, and there's a nice big rope bag here which takes care of all of the halyard tails whilst you're sailing, as well as everything else people want to dump in there. On the port side of the bulkhead you have the control line for the jib and most of the instruments. There's a holder for an iPad, a NASA Clipper Duet paddle wheel log and depth sounder, and a little handheld Garmin GPS. I've mounted a fixed VHF in the companionway where it can be used in the cockpit and in the cabin. The VHF has its own GPS antenna, and so it's a self-contained DSC unit. If you've been keeping up, you'll know that the main sheet is now led to a swivel block on the bridge deck. The thwart that you can see just aft of that slides up and down the cockpit and is effectively my cockpit table. One of the big advantages of the Mark I Shrimper is the huge cockpit. It really is massive. There's a convenient shelf at the front end underneath the bridge deck step, which takes everything from water bottles through phones, cameras, hats, sun cream, spare shackles, everything else you can think of that you want to hand. Below this is the bilge pump for the cockpit, which is not self-draining, and the control line for the lifting centre plate. The floor of the cockpit lifts and there is loads of room under there. I store my deflated dinghy as well as oars and a couple of fenders underneath there. Aft of the cockpit there is a huge locker. It has a 10-watt solar panel on it which I use to trickle charge the battery. This locker contains fuel for the outboard and all of the other paraphernalia you need to sail a small boat, and there's enough room in here to house a small outboard. The outboard is in a well which is offset to starboard, and the mounting block has a notch cut out of the top edge to allow the outboard to sit a little bit deeper. More importantly, give clearance for the tiller over the outboard cowling. I use a Tohatsu 6 horsepower 4-stroke. It came with the boat. The idea is that it's fixed in place and you use the tiller to steer, but in practice you can move the outboard a few degrees starboard or port to help in some tight situations. The Mark 1 outboard shrimper is by no means an easy boat to manoeuvre. There is another locker here which I use for fenders and dock lines. After this you can see the traveller for the main sheet and a short flagstaff for the ensign. There are also fittings here for an automatic tiller pilot, more of which in a later episode. The tiller has a folding extension, and instead of the complicated tiller clutch it came with, I've opted for a combination of a small loop of bungee and a line with a couple of turns around the tiller handle attached at both ends to a small cleat. So what about inside the cabin? Well, let's face it, there's not exactly a lot of room in here, but it's perfectly adequate for 2 people to sleep for a couple of nights, or longer if you're feeling adventurous. The 2 port lights into the anchor well I think were an optional extra. I've seen lots of Mark 1 shrimpers without them, but they do increase the light inside the cabin somewhat. I've covered the cooking arrangements in previous videos, but underneath the galley area there's quite a large moulded in locker. There are small lockers underneath the bunks, and the bunks themselves are really quarter berths, extending about halfway down the cockpit seating. In reality, this is where most of the equipment gets stuffed for a normal day sail. I have a little portable loo tucked in just underneath the step. If you want to use it, you've got to move it. It's somewhere else really. Just pulling it out works, but it's better in the cockpit. Most of the things you want to get your hands on really quickly while sailing are easily accessible from the various bins and hold-alls just inside the cabin. Well, this has been a very short and rather random walkthrough of Morning Vicar. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, advice, information, or just feel the need to rage, rant or shout, please feel free to do so in the comments. But more importantly, like and subscribe. And once again, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.